Welcome back to the Business of Art podcast. In this episode, we're going to be listening to an interview that I was able to be a part of. Darrell Beauchamp, who is the executive director of the Museum of Western Art down in Kerrville, Texas, interviewed me for their podcast. It's called It's Art, Let's Talk About It. And they were kind enough to let us actually share it with you guys. And in the interview, we talk a lot about my journey and the experiences that I've had to becoming a full-time artist. I hope you enjoy it.
And we're joined today by our good friend, Mark McKenna. Let's talk about your art for just a second. Let's talk about, well, I guess the first question I always have is, are you one of those guys who knew you were going to be a painter from the time you were 3 years old, or is it something that evolved? Tell me about how you evolved into the art world.
So it was definitely an evolution. I knew from a young age I liked art, and I recognized that it was something I loved to do. But I think growing up, I kind of always had the concept of starving artists in my brain. I'm like the only kid in my family that's really artistic, or at least really kind of even tried to develop it. And it's just been one of those things that, for lack of a better way to say it almost like it not that it was forced on me, but just things worked out and doors opened and anyway, it's been a really incredible journey, but it definitely wasn't from the get-go. I had no clue I was going to be an artist when I was little. So
I mean, you remember when you first decided I'm going to be an artist?
I think it was probably in high school that I recognized that I was going to make art probably for my entire life.
Yeah.
But as far as trying to make it an actual career and try to sell art and make a living, that was definitely not even on my radar. I don't think I even had a belief that I could make a living as an artist. Every artist I'd ever met was really poor and just scraping by. and so it was like I've always wanted a family, and I'm like, well, I got to do something that can provide for a family. So
what was your fallback position? What were you going to go to school for?
When I started school, I was going to be a dentist.
Really?
Yeah. Yep. That was my initial plan. And as I got closer to that, I was still actually an art major. But I was also doing all of the anatomy and physiology and science classes, the kind of the pre-med, route. But one of my professors, he was a professional illustrator, and he was just teaching at the college that I was at.
What college?
That was Brigham Young University, Idaho.
Okay.
And so he was just an adjunct professor there just because he loved to teach. And when he saw my art and we got to know each other better, he kind of took me aside and especially once he heard that I was planning to be a dentist, he thought that was the dumbest thing he ever heard. And he kind of gave me a kick in the pants, telling me that why on earth would I ever even consider working in people's mouths when I could actually create beautiful things.
Well, I mean, that's really I guess a good point, isn't it?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And every day I think about the potential of me being a dentist. I am so grateful for that man who corrected me, and I think I would have been miserable. So,
well, for any of the dentists listening to this podcast, we're sorry Mark didn't join your ranks, but we're real pleased that he joined the world of Western art. And why Western art? Or do you consider yourself a Western artist?
That's an interesting question. I think because I'm painting animals, mostly wildlife, but also a lot of domestic animals, I would say it's Western. I think typically people, when they think of Western, they think of cowboys and Indians and things like that. And I have painted a couple cowboy pieces before,
right?
But my forte, my go-to, and my bread and butter is in the wildlife. These animal portraits and kind of intimate scenes with these animals. And so I would say, yeah, especially because my animals typically are more of Yeah, exactly. But I wouldn't say it's like the stereotypical Western art.
And was that your first love?
I painted a lot more landscapes early on.
Did you?
And what was interesting is as I look back, I wasn't as good as I thought I was. I had rose-colored glasses, which was probably a blessing when it came down to it. I liked what I was painting, but I feel like my animals were, at least early on, definitely a step or two above what I was doing with landscapes.
For those listeners who want to play along, so to speak, as we're having this conversation, Mark McKenna Studios, is that the correct
Yeah,
web address?
markmckennastudios.com is my website, or if you're on like social media, it's Mark McKenna Studios.
Because we have a lot of people, as they listen to a podcast, they'll sit down at their computer and they'll play along, if you will. They'll look at the website. We found that to be a real popular. And of course, we'll post pictures and still, screen images for placing on our website, on our podcast website,
Yeah.
so that people can see your work as they're listening to the podcast. But markmckennastudios.com, or social media, you can go out to Twitter, Facebook, find Mark McKenna.
Yep. On Instagram and Facebook, it's Mark McKenna Studios.
Mark McKenna Studios.
Yep.
When you finally made the decision to become a full-time working artist, how tough a decision was that?
Honestly, it took me a while. So kind of the career route that I ended up taking was I ended up getting a BFA in illustration.
Okay.
And as I was getting close to graduating, I ended up double majoring into education, art education.
Okay.
And that was actually where I ended up going first. Was I became a teacher. I taught high school art for a total of 8 years. And 7 of those years were in the Cody, Wyoming area. I was at Cody High School, one of the 2 art teachers there. And it was awesome.
That's a fabulous place for art.
Yeah, exactly. So I landed in the perfect spot.
Yeah.
I'm an hour away from Yellowstone, so I have that wonderful resource of wildlife and Grand Teton National Park. Just this whole part of the state is just a wonderful place for anybody who likes wildlife. And so as I look back, I just think it was, divine intervention. I was placed right where I needed to be to get the inspiration I needed and in a place where I could grow my career in a very organic way without a lot of pressure. I wasn't worried about selling because I was making a living as a teacher. And I think it was, in 2013, I did a workshop with Greg Beauchamp. And if anybody who's listening and knows wildlife art, they know Greg Beauchamp. And just a phenomenal painter and human. And he ended up kind of becoming a mentor to me. And over, the next 5 years, really, it was from 2013 to 2018, I was building my art career kind of off the ground. And it was in 2018, it was that 2017-18 year that that was when I quit after that. And so, 5 years after working with Greg and that initial workshop and starting to go to shows and make connections, it was kind of a awesome roller coaster, but in a really good way, a really great trajectory. Every year just got better. And by the time I did quit teaching, it was actually a very smooth transition, I would say.
Do you remember your first art show?
I would say the one that really kind of opened my eyes to being able to make a living was the one up in Great Falls, Montana, with the Charlie Russell Museum. You're familiar with them, of course. Yeah, and so I went to the Heritage Inn, and I had a room, and I brought like 16 paintings, and I borrowed panels from somebody. And anyway, it was kind of a whirlwind. But my work was really well received, and I was really well received, and I sold it.
I was at the Charlie Russell in March in Montana, 8, 9, 10, 11, before you were there. But I know many of the same people that and you mentioned all the places, and yeah, I've been there, done that. So
Yeah, yeah,
I will give them props, if you will, or attaboys for Great Falls puts on a tremendous art show. They really do, and the C.M. Russell Museum is dear to my heart, as you know.
yeah,
But they're one of the big dogs in the hunt, of the art.
yeah,
So for
absolutely.
you,
And
to get immersed in that one, that was a good start.
amen. And that really, as I look back on that, what a blessing that was, getting connected, because there's just so many artists and there's so many connections to be made there with galleries, and it was just kind of like I got my feet wet, but I just pretty much dove in from that point on, and met all the right people, and every year it just got better there, and then I was starting to get introduced to people who are involved in different museum shows, and anyway, it's been a pretty flippin' awesome ride.
In addition to the Museum of Western Art here in Kerrville, and we just sold one of your lovely pieces, the Fox. What was it? In the
The coyote in the limelight, yeah.
limelight. What a wonderful piece that is, and it's sitting up in the main gallery on the an end wall. It just looks like $1 million. And of course, we sold it opening night, which we were thrilled about.
Yeah,
In
me
addition
too.
to yeah, in addition to the 40th Roundup exhibition to sell here at the Museum of Western Art, what other shows are you currently involved in?
So I, being in Wyoming, I I have started to be involved in the Western Visions show, which is with the National Museum of Wildlife Art in Jackson,
Right? Yeah,
for the
perfect.
last couple of years. Say that again.
Perfect venue for you, by the way.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah,
they
it's
do, right?
anything around Jackson is wildlife, and that's my forte. I've also, the last 3 years now, been involved with the Buffalo Bill Art Show with
Right.
the museum in Cody, and so those two are the ones that are close to home. The Charlie Russell, obviously, the Briscoe Museum down in San Antonio, not far away.
Right.
Yep, close to home for you guys. I've been with them now. I think this is my 4th year with them, and now this is my 2nd year with you guys. And then I do the Small Works Great Wonders show with the Cowboy Museum in Oklahoma City, and so those are the main shows that I paint for.
Talk about your painting day for us. People listening, they like hearing from the artist about, what's your typical day look like? Do you paint every day, for example?
If I don't have some other crazy stuff going on my schedule and some of my side projects that I'm working on, I am painting in the studio from usually I get home. I have some church stuff in the morning that I go do, and then after that I'm home around 9. So between 9 and 9:30, I'm in the studio, paint till about lunchtime. I have a break, and then I'm painting till about 5 or 6 at night. So it's kind of like the typical 9 to 5 that I've turned it into, just because if I'm going to wait for inspiration, I wouldn't paint very often. It just is something that you just have to do. And not that I don't love it. By all means, I love what I do, and I'm really grateful that I have it. But it's not like I'm always just having rainbows pouring into my studio, and that incredible inspiration that everybody, I think, kind of maybe you romanticize about a little bit. But
Yeah.
it's
Recently on this podcast, It's Art, Let's Talk About It, I've interviewed people like Herman Walker and Billy Shank, and both of them have been in the business 50 years.
wow. Yeah.
And, I asked them the question that I ask everybody, and that is, what advice would you give to young people starting out? But you're one of the young people,
Right.
but you still offer the advice as a working now professional artist who's doing well, making a name for yourself in the art world. What advice would you give somebody who's, where you were 10 years ago?
That's a great question. I would say to paint what you love. If you're seriously and sincerely interested in the work that you are creating, subject matter wise, style wise, it's going to be so much easier for you to engage in this in the long run. And I think that's one of the reasons why I did so well early on is, because I had that teaching gig, I was able to really just focus on growing where I wanted to grow.
Right.
And so I would say number one is paint what you love. Second is paint as often and as much as you can. You've got to be consistent. Create a consistent work schedule. Just like anything, if you don't use it, you get rusty. A car sits in the shop or out in the shed for 6 months. You're gonna have to do some work to it before you're gonna get it running again. And so having that consistency is going to help you create momentum. And then, I would say make a lot of paintings. I think a lot of artists will start a painting and then they won't finish it because they don't like it. And then it kind of just floats around the studio and they have a lot of like 20 unfinished products or projects.
Right.
And nothing's actually complete. And for me, it's like I get a painting done and I move on. And I get another. I'm never working on multiple paintings at a time because I'm solving all the problems and I'm pushing through it to completion, and then I move on.
Well, that's a question I usually ask artists: is that how many works do you have going at one time? Billy Shank, for example, the famous pop artist, he may have 8 or 10 paintings going at one time.
Wow,
it works that way. And I know other artists who, they start one, they start another, they start another. My good friend Jason Skull, the sculptor, he'll have 15 projects going at one time, right? I mean, but you say you work on one thing at a time.
Yep, absolutely. Yep, and almost without exception, I've always done that.
Do you ever abandon a painting?
There have been a couple, but honestly, I try to finish. I get to a point where it's like, okay, this is done. I will admit that there's paintings that I've destroyed after they're done. They're just not great. They're not my best work. You don't always hit a grand slam. And sometimes a knee to the middle of your painting, breaking it in half or throwing it in the dumpster and light it on fire. That's kind of therapeutic.
Just take the scraper and just get rid of it, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Our guest today on It's Art, Let's Talk About It is Mark McKenna, a friend of the Museum of Western Art here in Kerrville, Texas. And Mark, talk about mentors for a second. Let's talk about them. You mentioned, one of my favorite wildlife artists, and that's Greg Beauchamp. Same pronunciation of names, but not spelled the same. And people ask us all the time if we're related. And gosh, I'd like to be related to Greg, but he's one of those great guys. But talk about mentors and people who've helped you in your career. It's time for a shout out here.
Yeah, well, Greg Beauchamp, hands down, has been more influential than anybody else. I look up to a lot of artists, by all means, and I have a lot of people that I look at their work and I'm inspired by. But as far as somebody who's actually been that mentor role, Greg Beauchamp takes the cake. I did a workshop with him, like I said earlier. It was in 2013. It was my first wildlife workshop, and my work immediately jumped in quality. There was a connection that I made with him, his work, his process. And it was so exciting to me because I was starting to create work that I was starting to be thrilled with. The quality, the texture, just the feel of my work just bumped up, significantly. And I was able to actually get one of the paintings that he did in that workshop. So I have it on my wall. It's in my studio here. But I would like. He gave me his contact information. I had his email on his cell phone, and I tried not to abuse it, but I would ask him a question, and sometimes I get this response. It's like 2 pages long, where he is just giving me everything that he can even think of that's relative to my question or my issues, and he was just so generous and kind and just bent over backwards to help me out. And I think he knew that I was a sponge. I was so ready to just take everything and anything in that I could get from him because I was hungry. I was hungry for that success and that growth. And so I think it was fun for him, to give that to somebody
right
who was excited about it who was applying what they were learning. So I think that makes sense as to why he might have been so so generous. But I think I've heard from a lot of other artists that he's been the same way, just super generous. And
Yeah, and he's been painting a long time. It's 1970s, I guess, when
right,
he came on the big scene.
yeah,
And for our listeners who like to play along, I think it's G Beecham, BeechAm.com. I'd have to look it up real quickly, but Greg Beecham, Becham,
yeah,
his website. Yeah, gbeecham.work, believe it or
yeah.
not. But he paints out of Du Bois. How do you say
It's Du Bois is how you say it in Wyoming. So
Yeah. But what about others? Any others that come to mind?
I would say Chad Poppleton has become a really great friend of mine. And I think of, Joe Cronenberg, Chad Poppleton, people that got into it, a few years before I did.
All right.
And I've been able to make good connections. And Grant Redden, everybody knows Grant Redden.
Sure.
Nowadays, his cowboy stuff is just off the charts. And I've been at a workshop or two with Grant. But as far as just being really close to some other artists, I would say Chad Poppleton, Joe Cronenberg, even Brandon Bailey. We've got some of the CA artists that they're just good, generous people, good folks, and
all friends of the Museum of Western Art. We couldn't do what we do without the Chads and the Brads, and those guys are just phenomenal. You mentioned workshops on several occasions. How important is a workshop, and do you still attend workshops?
I do occasionally. I've slowed down for sure. I've actually started to teach some a little bit, which has been pretty cool. But yeah, I would say, when you go to college, the I'm not trying to bash on higher education at all, but a lot of art schools out there are just kind of weird. And especially when you're a realistic kind of painter and literal, the art world is so just out there.
Well, and I spent a number of years in art school, getting my degrees, and I don't think I heard one word, maybe a paragraph at the most, about Charlie Russell, about
Right.
Remington, about the Western art world, the wildlife world that we live in.
Yeah.
So much tied to the Bankskis and the other kind of impressionist art that we don't, really live in.
Yeah, and there's so much
life, getting out there.
Yeah, it's so different. It's an odd world, and it's broad. And so for us literal guys who like to paint things that look realistic and
looks like something, yeah.
right. It's just a whole nother world of learning that you can get at a workshop versus a lot of the university scenes. Now, I was really blessed and fortunate to be at BYU Idaho. They had a very traditional program where drawing, design, composition,
Right,
yeah, very solid basis in just the very traditional approach to art. And I couldn't have asked for a better foundation to run with. And then going to these workshops where you're working with somebody who you love their work, you love their style, and you're trying not to just get a broad understanding of art, you're specializing in very specific things, and you're looking for specific things that where you're getting stuck in your work. And so for me, a workshop has been almost 100 times better as far as me getting solid usable information that I can then apply immediately, versus at a university or college where it's just much more broad and general, and you're learning great things, but it's not really honing in on you specifically, and you're it's just a different feel.
What are some of the things that you know now that you wish you'd have known when you first got started? And I'll give you an example. A recent podcast artist said they answered that question, wish I had known more about business. I was solid in the arts, but I didn't know how to do a spreadsheet. Didn't know how to contact clients. I mean, is that the kind of thing, or I mean, is there something that you wished you'd have known?
I think,
Yeah.
yeah, I think there's a lot of ins and outs that I wish I would have known. I think, yeah, and I think mostly has to do with kind of that business side of what's the best ways to market myself. I didn't jump full into social media. Probably, I feel like I was like 3 years later than I should have been.
Right.
Jumping into social media, and I felt like just even some of the logistics around framing a painting and hardware of how to hang a painting and the wire systems. I felt like I was reinventing the wheel, and I did a lot of dumb things trying to figure it out.
Right.
And paintings that end up falling off the wall because my anchors are garbage, and just some of that.
It's really funny. We get works here at the museum, and we flip them over. We examine them and look at them, and 2 or 3 times out of 10, we replace the wire. Right?
Yeah.
I'm not going to put it on the wall just to watch it fall off, especially
Right.
young artists. So you have to learn that with them.
Yeah.
How important is framing to you?
It has become massively important. I think, a lot of artists, especially when they're starting out and they're not making a lot of money, they're like, well, what's the cheapest thing I can find? And a bad frame can really it can really do a bad thing to your work. And, something that's cheap where, for one, it's chintzy, it's rickety, it's going to fall apart. That's not professional. And I learned that relatively early. I was fortunate to have some artists who were friends that were like, "Hey, Mark, like, I got to be honest with you. Like, you need to up your quality on your frames." And it was the best. It was the best advice they could have given me, and I'm grateful. And honestly, I think so many people are they don't take criticism very well, and I felt like for the most part, I've been able to receive good constructive criticism really well, and that was I was so grateful for that feedback. I started to hire framers, especially if I had a custom kind of size painting. I would have them make me frames, or I would buy these standard frames, but from quality sources where they were really well made and they would complement my work and not take away from it.
Talk about your personal life for just a second, if you will.
Yeah.
Because people like to get to know the artist.
Yeah.
You have a young family.
Yes. I call it the McKenna family circus. We have 6 kids.
6.
Yep.
Okay.
And I still look pretty slim. My wife is amazing, and I couldn't even be remotely close to where I'm at without her and her support. She's an amazing woman. Our oldest kid, she is 15, and our youngest is 2, and so it's a pretty broad spread. We've got high school, middle school, elementary, preschool, and toddler. So it's like we've got the full gamut.
Time to paint.
Yeah, my wife's amazing.
Yeah, I hear that a lot from artists. And it goes back as far as Charlie Russell. He had Nancy, who held his world together. And I think that's real important in the art world, and in general, in family life in general, is have a great partner that you can trust to help get all the other stuff done while you do what you're supposed to be doing. So
that is absolutely the truth, and I struck gold. I really did.
Any of the children interested in art?
Absolutely. In fact, all of them love to play around with paint, crayons. They're all very artistically motivated, and I don't know what's going to happen as far as if any of them are going to pursue it. My oldest daughter loves photography. She loves watercolor. By the way, all of my kids are boys except for 5. So my 4 girls,
aren't you?
yeah, 4 girls, and then my boy, and then one other girl. And so my girls, I talk about my girls a lot because my boy, he's just a wild cowboy is what he is.
Yeah.
And he's not too into art at this point yet. But my older girls are really, they're creative. They love to, anything crafty or creative. They just love getting into that stuff. And, I think they have potential. I'm not one to really push it on them. Like if they're interested, I'll be, so excited to help them. But I'm just going to kind of let things kind of fly on their own and see where they go.
What's next for Mark McKenna, the artist?
Man,
Oh, big move out there.
something that I'm actually working on quite a bit, and I don't know how I do it. I have an amazing wife, and right now I'm trying to create some online content.
Okay.
Obviously, I've got paintings in line for, I've got shows lined up and things like that, and I try to schedule those out as best as I can. Meantime, I'm trying to create some online content. I've already created a course for artists that's all about Photoshop.
Okay.
Teaching artists how to utilize that resource when they're manipulating their reference material. It's just a phenomenal tool that a lot of artists don't know enough about. And then I'm creating it's kind of going to be under one umbrella, but the rest of the course is going to be focused on painting processes, kind of the basics of oil painting, and then my process of painting, the way that I lay down the paint and use the palette knife and build up texture, kind of my approach. And then also kind of even the finish work, like framing and shipping and kind of some of those logistics that a lot of artists don't think about or hear about in their education. And then also a little bit of business, how I run my business, talk about keeping records and making connections and, getting people on an email list and
Right.
approaching social media. And then also the other aspect will be a little bit of camera basics. A lot of artists need to use a camera, and especially I would say artists that are a little bit older than I am that haven't been around digital cameras a whole lot. It's just kind of some of those basics to let you just start to get into it and use it without being afraid of it.
Yeah. Well, sounds like you've got a full life, a
Yeah.
full career ahead of you. We're so thrilled here at the Museum of Western Art to have you as part of our world. We hope you'll continue that relationship. And we'll tell you
Absolutely.
our next Roundup exhibition has been moved to April. You are aware of that.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah. So get to painting now, young man, because we want you to get in the show. And I will tell you, when patrons and staff were voting for works, your piece, the coyote that we sold for you, was one of the top 3 or 4
Wow.
people selected. They just
Oh,
absolutely
that's an
loved it.
honor. That's so cool. Thank you for
People were
sharing
voting.
that. That's so awesome.
The Patrons Choice Award was won by Rachel Brownlee, but you were in the running there with it. It was one of gosh, it's fun to watch, new artists. Rachel's a new artist, a young artist, I guess I would say, especially compared to some of the old, the old people who, are in my show. But yeah, we appreciate your support of, what we're doing there. Wish you nothing but the best. Let's remind everybody again about your website. How to find out more about you and your work, and if they like the work, how do they buy it?
Oh, that's perfect. I would say, yeah, I'm if I have an available painting, it's on my website.
Okay.
And you'll actually get first glance will be on social media. So if you're on Facebook and Instagram, those are my 2 go-tos as far as social media goes.
Right.
I post immediately there, and then I will typically almost within the same day will post onto my website. And I always, if it's available, I typically just say it's available. And the prices are on my website, or if you want to send me a message, you can get prices.
And that's markstudio.com.
Yep, markmckennastudios.com.
Studios, plural. Got
Yep.
it. What are you involved in galleries?
I do work with one gallery in particular in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. It's Astoria Fine Art,
Okay.
and they're right there on the square. Great gallery. They're wonderful. I've started to work a little bit with the Illume Gallery up in Phillipsburg, Montana.
Right.
At this point, it's more we're just trying to test the waters. So, but as far as Astoria goes, they're the ones that I would say is my main gallery.
Is it safe to assume that in the next year we're going to see your works in Great Falls, Montana?
Yes.
Kerrville, Texas.
Yes, sir.
Where else?
Down at the Briscoe in San Antonio.
So in March at the Briscoe.
Yep, exactly. Definitely in Jackson, at, the Wildlife Museum there. As long as they invite me back, the Buffalo Bill Art Show in Cody. Other than that, those are kind of my main ones that are at least I think are guaranteed at this point. So.
And if anybody wants to know where they find your work, go out to the website. You have a listing of all your shows that are coming up, the works that are available. And we want people to go out there and enjoy the beautiful wildlife art, Western art of Mark McKenna. So we appreciate you taking the time today, Mark.
Man, thank you so much, Darrell. It's such an honor, and really, like, you guys are doing an incredible thing, and your museum is phenomenal. And I'm thrilled to have met you in person and to have this interview and to be associated with you guys. It really,
our podcast is being watched, listened to by, way more people than I ever thought possible would want to, tune in to listen to me talk to anybody.
Right.
But, it's available on the Texas Hill Country Podcast Network. A link available at the museumofwesternart.com. We encourage people to forward it to their friends and families, and when this one comes out, I know it's going to be popular because everybody wants to hear about Mark McKenna.
Well, you're all crazy, but thank you.
We appreciate you taking the time today. This has been It's Art. Let's talk about it. Podcast of the Texas Hill Country Podcast Network and the Museum of Western Art in Kerrville, Texas. We encourage people to come on out and see the lovely work of Mark McKenna hanging on the walls here at the museum. Watch for his work on markmckennastudios.com. And Mark, thank you for taking the time today. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Darrell. Have a good one.
Thanks. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much for listening to the Business of Art podcast. We would love to have you join us every week as we interview incredible artists and gain insights from their personal journeys to success. If this has been valuable to you, please subscribe and share it with your other artist friends. We'll see you in the next episode.